Welcome to This Week in Hastings Headline History, where we take a look back at what was making news around Hastings and St. Johns County, Florida, over a century ago. These are stories directly out of the pages of the Hastings Herald, which was published weekly in the early 1900s. It's fascinating to hear what they were talking about, as well as how they spoke in their articles from over 100 years ago. So sit back and enjoy, as this week we go back to the stories that were the talk of the town in 1920. Sugar Corporation purchases more land. As a new indication that the United Sugar Corporation is serious in its plans to erect its proposed big refinery on the site at the junction of the Palatka Federal Point Road, the announcement has been made this week of the purchase of additional land by that concern. The corporation's property now includes all the land formerly owned by B. Peck along the Federal Point Road to the canal, and from the road to the St. Johns River. The transfer of property was completed on Tuesday of this week. Sentence suspended. Hampton McLaughlin and Paul Edwards Barron, two young boys apparently of good families, were given a hearing before County Judge George William Jackson Monday morning on the charge of beating their way on a Florida East Coast Railway train. With the understanding that they would look for work, the two boys were the recipients of the mercy of the court, the judge suspending sentence upon them. They stated that they were on an adventure, looking for employment, and had some money but did not wish to spend it all in railroad fare. As hunting season was getting underway this week back in 1920, here are some facts about Florida hunting in 1920. It was required to pay for a hunting license even back then. The revenues from hunting licenses were going to the school fund. And hunting limits were as follows. An individual hunter may take only 1 deer, 2 turkeys, 20 quail, or 25 other birds in a day, and killing for the season shall not exceed 3 deer, 10 turkeys, and 300 other birds. Pheasants and grouse were so scarce in Florida that the open season for them was only 1 month, from November 20th to December 20th. The newspaper also ran an article this week in 1920 with a number of don'ts of hunting, with the goal of avoiding any humans being shot this hunting season. And as you hear them, you may realize the more things change, the more they stay the same. Don't take any chances. The function of the shotgun is to scatter shot, but be very careful where you scatter it. Don't blaze away in haste, and don't get excited. Many a shooter has filled his favorite dog full of lead just because he was over-anxious. Don't take every rustle of a bush or bow to be a sure indication of game. Remember, sometimes an inquisitive person has a penchant for being in strange places. Don't carry a loaded gun through the streets or in cars, trains, automobiles, or any other kind of vehicle, or leave it around farmhouses to have some child playfully blow a head off. Don't drag a gun under a fence with the muzzle pointed towards you. Don't climb over fences with your gun or lean it against a tree until you get over. Put it through the fence and on the ground, business end before. Don't hunt with anyone that you know to be careless. Carelessness with 3 1/4 drams of powder behind 1 1/8 ounces of shot is inviting sure death. Don't borrow a dog or a gun, or loan either. Don't rest on the muzzle of your gun. And don't rest the muzzle of your gun on the ground. A gun muzzle clogged with dirt or mud is a dangerous proposition. And a Thanksgiving tradition your family may take part in is hitting its 100th birthday this year in 2024. The first Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was in 1924. The goal was to promote the Macy's store by getting people out to see the parade and then getting them to come in and do their Christmas shopping. And it worked. About 250,000 people came out to watch that first parade. But the parade you're used to is a little different looking than the original. The first Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was called the Macy's Christmas Parade and didn't have the balloons we are so accustomed to these days. The first of those showed up in 1927. Instead, the parade in its first year was full of floats, professional bands, and live animals. And at the end of the parade, Santa Claus was crowned King of the Kitties on the balcony of the Macy's store. The parade has definitely changed in its appearance over the years, but it's been a constant annual event with the exception of 1942 to 44, when the parade was put on hold because of World War II. And finally, appropriate for this week of Thanksgiving, this week's Hastings Herald held an editorial about looking on the bright side of life. It is titled, "Never Lose Your Head," and it reads, "Man never is but always to be blessed," wailed a pessimistic gentleman of a former day. But haven't you often noticed that calamity after calamity is predicted which never happens? There was to be no labor to garner our harvest this year. Labor turned out to be plentiful. Our export trade was to have dwindled to insignificant proportion long before this. The actual figures were enormous. A few weeks ago, a coal famine assuredly was to prostrate America. More coal is being mined and moved daily than ever before, and prices at the pit mouth are dropping. The Bolshevists a few weeks ago were on the eve of overrunning Poland and Germany, and indeed half of Europe. Most of the running they have done since has been toward Moscow. Prohibition, you will recall, was to bring nothing short of civil war on the part of the working classes. While every hotel in the land was to go bankrupt, California was to become a desert. Well, there has been no civil war, the demand for hotels is keener than ever before known, and California grape growers are reaping the best prices in history. Moral: never lose either your head or your heart in this greatly blessed land. I hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Hastings Headline History. This podcast was brought to you by Presenting the Past, bringing history back to the present through historic presentations and the sale of treasures from days gone by. This episode was written and produced by me, Michelle Murillo, with the aid of vintage copies of the Hastings Herald. Now it's time for this week's musical memory, when we listen back to a song that everyone was listening to over 100 years ago. While you may or may not know the words to this week's song, you will likely recognize the tune. It's called The Prisoner's Song. It's a number from what was called the hillbilly music genre. The story goes that Vernon Dalhart, who originally recorded it, heard it from his cousin, who sang it one day at his house. That cousin learned it from his brother, who possibly learned it while he was serving time in prison. The song stuck with Vernon, so he recorded it, and it stuck with everyone who heard it. It became one of the best-selling songs of the 1920s. Over the years, it made its way into the movies, then TV shows. It was recorded by a number of artists. But when you hear the song, you may think, hey, that sounds like something I recognize from church. And you'd be right. This song went on to be a strong influence in Albert Brumley's hymn, I'll Fly Away, recorded in 1929. So let's listen to the original song that had an influence on so many. Here's Vernon Dalhart's 1924 recording of The Prisoner's Song.
Oh, I wish I had someone to love me, someone to call me their own. Oh, I wish I had someone to live with, 'cause I'm tired of living alone. Oh, please meet me tonight in the moonlight. Please meet me tonight all alone. For I have a sad story to tell you. It's a story that's never been told. I'll be carried to the new till tomorrow, leaving my poor darling alone, with the cold prison bars all around an angel